So this was a month of reading. I guess we can put it that way. I don't know if it was good or not because it feels like I read absolutely nothing. So let's get into it, see how the month was. I started the month with Dangerous Games, What the Moral Panic Over Role-Playing Games Says About Play, Religion, and Imagined Worlds. That book is phenomenal. It's written by Joseph Laycock. He has a PhD in religious studies. He's down at Texas State University. And it is such a fascinating dive into the satanic panic of the 80s that involved Dungeons and Dragons and just all the things around that. And then I listened to an interview with him from Reading D&D Aloud, and I'll link that in the description. And it was so good. He talks about how one of the reasons why a lot of these religious leaders probably saw Dungeons and Dragons as a threat is because it was filling in that same kind of mental space that religion fills in. Like these people were coming together and all sharing this same ideal and doing these rituals of playing the game. And yeah, he just thought it was kind of a threat. And then the other thing was some of those religious leaders were like, well, wait, if these people are coming together over this make-believe thing in the exact same way as a religion, then what does that say about my religion? So it might have just been an overreaction due to something like that. And there's just so much more in the book. It is very dense, but very compelling. I say it's dense because he gets into a lot of like really complex topics that revolve around kind of how the brain thinks of these things, and then these really deep dives into the origins of different parts of satanic panic. But it's so good, and he tears down these lunatics that were against D&D then, and he refers to them as one of my new favorite phrases, which is moral entrepreneurs. These are people that just take like a moral issue and use it to their advantage. I'd never thought of it that way before, and it's really, really interesting to think about. Moral entrepreneurs. Add that to your verbal repertoire. I read my first romance ever. I talked about it a little earlier in the month, but I read Funny Story by Emily Henry, and it is magnificent. Easily one of the better books I've read this year. I loved it. I loved everything about it, and I now want to read everything she has ever written. Yeah, the story follows Daphne, a librarian in this small lakeside town in Michigan, and it's just so beautifully written. Like I said before, there's one word that I didn't like in the entire book. Everything else is perfectly placed. Perfect characters, perfect pacing, perfect plot. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, and it follows her as she is dumped by her fiance the night after his bachelor party. Like, this is on the back of the book, so I'm not really spoiling anything. And then her new story starts, which is her being stranded in this town, not knowing if she wants to leave or not. And she's living with someone new, and that's her fiance's new girlfriend's ex. So both of them were dumped. So you have these two people that got dumped that are living together, and they're just miserable. And it's just so interesting to see how you learn about these characters and just how real they feel. The dialogue is literally how people talk to one another, which I know sounds stupid when I say it out loud, but you don't get dialogue like that. And the little snippy witticisms and her kind of derailing of her train of thought as you're reading the story, where she's like, oh yeah, and then, you know, blah, blah, blah kind of thing, making these very relevant references to just things that I would say or think about, or people I know would say or think about. And I just couldn't believe that it was that good. So yeah, Funny Story by Emily Henry is awesome. You should definitely check it out. Well, I said I didn't know how this month went. Going good so far. I think my problem was I had a lot of false starts. And as we get further into this, I'll tell you some of the books that just took almost the entire month to read because they just were dragging. But you know what wasn't dragging? Beowulf. Holy crap, Beowulf is good. I read the Seamus Heaney translation, and it's amazing. I think that of course it's a little dated, which, I mean, it was written over 1,000 years ago. What do you expect? But the storytelling is awesome. This story is so good that I'm about a third of the way through writing a script, and I don't write scripts for a lot of this stuff. I really want to do it justice. I want to do like a kind of a breakdown of everything that happens and talk about the themes and stuff like that. I don't know when I'm going to get to it, but I'm chipping away at it, and hopefully I can get it out in the near future. Yeah, Beowulf is just so good. There's these epic action scenes. There's these themes of getting old, and, you know, you're not always going to be as good as you are in your prime, and the power of someone having your back, like when you need it. All that stuff. It's just really, really good. So definitely go read Beowulf. I mean, newsflash, Beowulf's good. So yeah, give it a try. Let me know in the comments if you've read Beowulf and which translation. And don't lie to me and tell me you read the Old English version. I only know one person that would have done that, and that's Philip Chase. Next book. See, this book took a while. I read The Tower of Fear by Glenn Cook, part of my Glenn Cook reading project. The book was a very slow read for me because there's a lot going on. I think it is the best written of his standalones that I've read so far. But the problem with it is the cast is huge. There's so many characters, and there's all these like political machinations and just a lot going on, and it all takes place in one city, which is nice. And the city kind of has the vibe of Roman occupied Jerusalem. So you have these people who are not happy that they lost this war against these invaders that are now occupying their city. And it just kind of goes from there. There's loyalists to the rebel cause that are kind of sniffing out people that have betrayed them. You see some of the occupiers who are actually trying to be decent to the people in the city and help them. And there's just all sorts of weird things going on. It reads like a modern version of pulp historicals or something in like all the best ways. Very vivid and vibrant descriptions, interesting characters, just modernized to a little easier to read and just a little better paced for a novel. It's not like my favorite or anything, but like I said, it's the best of the standalones. Read another Glenn Cook book, Fated Steel Heat, which is my least favorite Garrett P.I. novel so far. So the problem with it is it's very disjointed in the pacing, and the mystery, while kind of interesting, was just like okay at best. What really sucks though is this is one of those like must reads in the Garrett P.I. series. A lot of them aren't must reads, but this one is because it introduces some very important characters for the rest of the series, and it has some of Garrett's best character development. You really see him change a lot as a person in this one in ways you don't see in every book. You know, they're mysteries, so they're not really designed to have a lot of character development, but Garrett does change throughout the series, and it really shows in this one. And he's developed some relationships with some people that I really like from earlier in the series, and it's great to see them here. But the mystery just wasn't very good, and it just felt disjointed in a lot of places. It felt like you were reading the book through the eyes of someone that took one too many blows to the head, which does describe Garrett, but it probably shouldn't be written that way because it's confusing for the reader. And now we're back to bangers. Holy crap. The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I knew nothing about this book before I opened it. And by opened it, I mean pressed play because I listened to the audiobook because Michael Kramer is my boy. It's so unbelievably good. Someone described it as, think epic fantasy, but you replace the magic system with engineering. And that is a very good way to sum it up. But it doesn't give you everything you need to know. This is heavily inspired by ancient Chinese history and folklore, and it is magnificent. Just such a refreshing read for a epic fantasy grognard like me. I've read so much epic fantasy in my life that it's hard for me to be like surprised by world building or by events that happen. And not only is everything in here very fresh, the way Ken Liu writes the characters is also very fresh. Like these grown ass men at times, like they're crying, like they're hiding it because they're manly men, but you never get stuff like that in a lot of these stories. Like you don't have the turning away to wipe their eyes kind of thing, or these raw emotions and this brotherly love and seeing that love like destroyed and just seeing the extremes that these people go to attain power. It's just fascinating. And it's such a compelling novel. And in the way it's written, it's like kind of a little more detached than you would expect for a third person limited story. And you see like conversations between like gods. You spend the whole book thinking, were they manipulating this part? Was this manipulated by them? Like, what's really going on here? What is this building up to? And I've heard that I am in for quite a ride for the rest of the series, and I will be getting to the rest of the series this year. Hopefully sooner than later, but man, I really want to just get the rest of those books in my brain. I want to experience them. The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu is so good. Check it out. This book's been on my must-read list for my entire adult life, and I finally got to it. I finished Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And, you know, I mean, it's Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. You're going into Africa, and It's like this dark exploration of colonialism and its effects on both the colonized and the colonizing, and just how it kind of just damages both of you. And I really like it, but before I read this again, because it's very short, I will watch Apocalypse Now. I think Apocalypse Now is like a better version of Heart of Darkness, which makes sense. It was a movie created about 100 years later, but you can tell in that movie that they have a great appreciation for the source material they used, which was Heart of Darkness, and it's really good. Heart of Darkness is like a must read for anyone that really wants to understand late 1800s fiction. So I highly recommend it. And it actually ties into my next book, which was King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. Speaking of something that you should be reading from the late 1800s, especially if you like things like Lord of the Rings, because H. Rider Haggard was a huge influence on Tolkien. The interpersonal relationships between his characters is the interpersonal relationships between Tolkien's characters in the Lord of the Rings. This book is very, very... I love me some men, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. This book has so many instances of the POV character being like, he's got beautiful pale legs, and look, he's had to spend all this time with his beautiful pale legs showing, or this man looks like a Viking god. He is so handsome and so beautiful in combat, and a woman would be so lucky to have him. And it's like, bro, you want him, which is fine. That's great. But I don't think that was really meant that way at the time. During H. Rider Haggard's career, this whole showing off these beautiful, strong men wasn't like a sexual thing. It was just a showing off how good looking and good a man can be, and the power of like brotherhood and that bond between, it's the bromance. That's the way it should be described. This man was writing about bromances almost 150 years ago. And it's a really good story. There's some very creepy moments. I'm going through this and it's like, la-di-da, yeah, we're in Africa. We're going on an adventure. We're going to find this lost brother. And then some dude gets ripped in half by an elephant. That is when I realized that things were going to get real in this story. And it's just a really cool adventure. And it's dated, of course, but even for its time in the late 1800s, it's very, very good. The Rest is History did a really interesting episode about this book, and I will put that in the description as well. You should check that out, even without reading it. They do a really good job of kind of putting H. Rider Haggard into context for the time that he wrote. Okay, this month was really good. I wasn't sure if this month was really good. This wasn't like my most prolific month, which is fine because I'm already so far ahead of my normal reading average that I would probably do my brain good to slow down. But I read John the Balladeer. Now, I did a video about my complete John the Balladeer collection, and to celebrate, I went right into all the short stories because I didn't have those. The only way to get them was like Who Fears the Devil, that was printed by Planet Stories that I could not find a copy of, or John the Balladeer, which was published in the 1980s, and I didn't want to overpay for a paperback, so I got my complete John the Balladeer. Now, I will say I listened to them, and that's Owl's Hoot in the Daytime and Other Omens or Bad Omens, I don't remember, which is an Audible collection of all of the John the Balladeer short stories. But I'm going to warn you, in a podcast I was listening to, they kind of described these stories as sipping whiskey. You don't want to consume all of them back to back to back. So just do a couple stories at a time and don't binge the whole thing. All the stories share a lot of the same themes with little twists on them or little explorations of other things. And so they're better if you pace yourself. I will say Walk Like a Mountain and the story right after that one that I can't remember the name of are my two favorites by a wide margin. Walk Like a Mountain is so cool and so epic. It shows off Manly Wade Wellman's ability to write these very beautiful, very tightly written like sentences. He can take in one sentence what most people will spend half a page describing, and you will feel it. And it's just so wonderful. And the story I'm struggling to remember the name of, I got to look it up, it's bothering me. On the Hills and Everywhere is probably one of the most beautiful parables about Jesus that I have ever read. And I'm not religious, but man, that story is wonderful. I couldn't believe it. Like, it brought me to tears. It was so beautiful. It's a story about putting yourself out there in order to make the world better. And it's just so beautiful. So yeah, definitely check those two out. Walk Like a Mountain and On the Hills and Everywhere, like they are magnificent. you could just skip right to those. It's like chapter 9 and chapter 10 in the audiobook, or just find them somewhere online or something. I don't know. I loved every bit of it, and I cannot wait to read more Manly Wade Wellman. He is very rapidly climbing my favorite writers of all time. And now we get to the last book, which I am pretty sure I am the only person that has read it in the last decade. I'd have to go look. There is one review on Goodreads, well, until I posted mine, and it is Ho Chi Minh, Legend of Hanoi. I picked it up because I wanted some more biographies. I really like biographies, and I picked it up at the library sale. It's a copy from my library that they got in 1971, and it's just been there this whole time. It's written by Jules Archer, who I don't really know much about, but it's got 16 ratings total, like in the history of Goodreads. And the book was published in 1971, so the Vietnam War wasn't over yet, which makes this even more interesting as like a time capsule. But it's just great. It's like 200 pages, and it's a young adult or high schooler level biography, but it's very complete. It's very well written, and I think it is a fantastic intro to Ho Chi Minh and the feelings of the world during the Vietnam War, and even before that, during the Indochina War between France and the Vietnamese. And it's just really good. You get to see Ho Chi Minh from the beginning of his life to the end of his life, and everything he did and the decisions he made and why he made them is great. I think for June, I'm going to try to read some more nonfiction. I've just been kind of narratived out, I guess is the best way to put it. My brain can only hold so many narratives at one time. It's like that episode of Married with Children, Kelly Knows Something, where she can only hold so many things in her brain. And so Al fills her brain with all this sports trivia. And then anytime something new gets put in, a little bloop, little thing comes out. Yeah, I think that's me now. I got to slow down for a little bit. I say that as I'm about to read 7 Westerns in June, along with starting Red Rising by Pierce Brown, which I also know nothing about, which comes across as insane probably to all of you that have read about the series or have friends who won't shut up about the series, but somehow I've known about it this whole time, but I know nothing about it. Takes place on Mars, I think, so that will be interesting. And other than that, I don't really know what else I'm going to do in June. I got a lot going on in June, so other than Westerns, I'm going to get, of course, some nonfiction, and I don't know it yet, and 1 or 2 Glenn Cook books. It depends. I'm going to read a Garrett novel. I have 6 of those left, so if I read 1 a month, I'll be good to go. And other than that, I'm not really sure what my plans are. Let me know in the comments what your plans are for June, or what you read for May. I'd love to hear that too. That's great. And let me know if you've read any of these. I would love to talk about them as usual. It's just really fun to kind of not commiserate, because that usually means a negative connotation, but it's nice to talk to other people when they've read the same things. Even if we're just like, yeah, book good. That's all we say. It's great. I think that's it. May was a better month than I thought. I had some other books that I DNF'd and forgot about them until now, but they don't matter because I DNF'd them. And other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.